Welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. This week begins our deep dive into U.S. pop culture in the year 1969. It'll more or less take up where episode 128, U.S. Pop Culture 1968, Part 8, left off. As usual, we'll start with the first 3 months of the year, January, February, March, talking about music, television, movies, news, and what our friends the Beach Boys were up to. And this has turned out to be an awkwardly sized episode. It's a little bit too much for one episode, not quite enough for two. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to carve off the Beach Boy content and use it next week when we begin talking about the 2020 album. Consequently, this episode will be very light on Beach Boy content. Even so, that leaves us a lot to get to, so let's get started with music. As you can imagine, the first charts of 1969 looked a lot like the last charts of 1968. Most of the records I discussed in episode 128, so I'll go over them pretty quickly here. On the first album chart of the year, January 4th, 1969, at number 1 was the Beatles' big new sprawling double album in the second of what would eventually become 9 non-consecutive weeks at number 1. At number 2 was Wichita Lineman by Glen Campbell. At number 3 was The Second by Steppenwolf. There were 2 new entries in the top 10 at 4 and 5. At number 4, the Fool on the Hill album by Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66. This will peak at number 3 next week, January 11th. And at number 5, Diana Ross and the Supremes Join the Temptations, which will peak at number 2 next week. At number 6 was Cheap Thrills by Big Brother and the Holding Company. Number 7, Electric Ladyland by the Jimi Hendrix Experience. Number 8 was Judy Collins' Wildflowers. Number 9 belonged to Inagata Davida by Iron Butterfly. And at number 10 was Timepiece, The Rascals' Greatest Hits. Turning to top 10 singles on that first chart of 1969, at number 1 was I Heard It Through the Grapevine by Marvin Gaye. It'll ultimately spend 7 weeks at number 1. That's a feat equaled in the 1960s only by Tossin' and Turnin' in 1961, I Want to Hold Your Hand in 1964, I'm a Believer in 1966-67, and surpassed only by Theme from a Summer Place in 1960 and Hey Jude in 1968, both of which spent 9 weeks at number 1. For Once in My Life by Stevie Wonder was at number 2. I'm Gonna Make You Love Me by Diana Ross and the Supremes and the Temptations was at number 3. At number 4 was a new entry in the top 10 this week, Soulful Strut by Young Holt Unlimited. It was a very cool and very 60s instrumental that will peak at number 3 on January 18th. At number 5 was Glen Campbell's Wichita Lineman. At number 6, Cloud 9 by the Temptations. At number 7, Love Child by Diana Ross and the Supremes. Stormy by Classics 4 was at number 8. Who's Making Love by Johnny Taylor was at number 9. And at number 10 was another new entry in the top 10 this week, Hooked on a Feelin' by B.J. Thomas. It'll spend 2 weeks at number 5 beginning next week, January 11th. Top 10 singles that will come and go in the first quarter included Son of a Preacher Man by Dusty Springfield, which will spend 2 weeks at number 10 beginning January 18th. Crimson and Clover by Tommy James and the Shondells will spend 2 weeks at number 1 starting February 1st. Worst That Could Happen by Brooklyn Bridge will go to number 3 for 2 weeks beginning February 1st. I Started a Joke by the Bee Gees will go to number 6 on February 8th. Hang 'Em High by Booker T and the MGs will go to number 9 for 2 weeks beginning February 8th. Everyday People, a great new single by Sly and the Family Stone, will go to number 1 for 4 weeks beginning February 15th. Touch Me by The Doors will go to number 3 for 2 weeks beginning February 15th. Build Me Up Buttercup by The Foundations will spend 3 weeks at number 3 beginning February 22nd. Can I Change My Mind by Tyrone Davis will go to number 5 on February 22nd. I'm Living in Shame by Diana Ross and the Supremes will hit number 10 on February 22nd. You Showed Me by the Turtles will go to number 6 on March 1st. Baby Baby Don't Cry by Smokey Robinson and the Miracles will go to number 8 for 2 weeks beginning March 1st. This Magic Moment by Jay and the Americans, a cover of the Drifters' number 16 hit from 1960, will go to number 6 on March 8th. Dionne Warwick was back with another great song from Burt Bacharach and Hal David, This Girl's in Love with You. It'll be number 7 for 3 weeks beginning March 8th. And Indian Giver by 1910 Fruit Gum Company will go to number 5 on March 22nd. Some earlier albums becoming significant early in 1969 include Crimson and Clover by Tommy James and the Shondells. This album features some of the most unusual liner notes of any album. A note from Vice President Hubert Humphrey thanking them for their support during his recent unsuccessful run for president. It'll spend the first 4 weeks of March at number 8. And Switched on Bach by Walter Carlos, originally released in October 1968. It's Bach favorites with a futuristic twist played on one of the new Moog synthesizers. This will go to number 10 on April 26th. Other earlier albums becoming significant in 1969 include Tom Jones Live, originally released in 1967, will go to number 13 beginning May 10th and stay there for 3 weeks. Tom Jones' 1968 album, The Tom Jones Fever Zone, will go to number 14 on May 17th. Let Us Go Into the House of the Lord by the Edwin Hawkins Singers, released in 1968, will go to number 15 for 2 weeks beginning June 14th after their single, Oh Happy Day, becomes a hit. Three Dog Night's self-titled album, also known as One, which was released back in October 1968, will go to number 11 on June 21st, 1969. Also originally released in October 68 and now climbing the chart was the original soundtrack album to Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet. In big new album releases, on January 5th, we got Bayou Country by Creedence Clearwater Revival. On January 13th came the soundtrack to the Beatles' new animated feature, Yellow Submarine, containing 4 new Beatles songs. This will go to number 2 for 2 weeks beginning March 1st. And the self-titled debut from Led Zeppelin, a group originally called the New Yardbirds, who were currently grabbing a lot of attention on their first North American tour. Like most debut albums, this will take a little while to peak. It'll eventually go to number 10 on May 17th. And released on January 17th was Aretha Franklin's Soul 69. This will spend 2 weeks at number 15 beginning March 9th. And on the 17th, Iron Butterfly's new album, Ball. Also released in January was Donovan's Greatest Hits. Released on February 1st was Goodbye, the farewell album from Cream. And for Beach Boy fans, on February 10th came 2020. Much more about this, of course, to come. On February 17th came Cloud 9 by The Temptations. Also released in February is Engelbert by Engelbert Humperdinck, which will go to number 12 for 2 weeks beginning May 10th. New releases in March include At Your Birthday Party by Steppenwolf, which will go to number 7 for 2 weeks beginning April 12th. Galveston by Glenn Campbell, which will go to number 2 on May 3rd. Dionne Warwick's Motion Picture Hits, which will go to number 11 for 2 weeks beginning May 17th, and Frank Sinatra's album My Way, which will go to number 11 for 2 weeks beginning May 31st. In movies, as the year opens, Candy is still number 1 at the box office. Steve McQueen in Bullet will go to number 1 2 weeks later, followed by Barbra Streisand in Funny Girl for the last week of January and all of February and March. Other films still doing well at the box office as the year began include Franco Zeffirelli's Romeo and Juliet, Oliver, the musical, which will win Best Picture of 1968 at the Academy Awards presented on April 14th, 1969. The Lion in Winter, starring Katharine Hepburn and Peter O'Toole. Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, a musical comedy for kids from the novel by James Bond creator Ian Fleming and produced by James Bond film producer Albert Cubby Broccoli. It stars Dick Van Dyke, Leslie Ann Howes, and Lionel Jeffries. As usual, the first quarter isn't a great time for new movie releases. Among the most notable are Sweet Charity, Bob Fosse's screen version of the Broadway hit musical comedy by Neil Simon, starring Shirley MacLaine, released on Valentine's Day, February 14th. Premiering on March 2nd, The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, a critically acclaimed drama which will earn a 1969 Best Actress Oscar for its star Maggie Smith. On March 5th came 99 Women. For late 60s audiences looking for previously verboten screen thrills comes this early and financially successful example of the women in prison genre, which will be exploited mostly by low-budget filmmakers in the early 70s. It'll actually be number one at the box office the week of May 7th. On May 10th came the U.S. opening of I Am Curious, Yellow, a 1967 erotic drama from Sweden, which will eventually do great box office in the U.S. Being able to see a movie with so much sexual content is still a new and controversial thing in the U.S., and the public seems cautious about it at first. It's legitimized by the news that high-profile celebrities, including Johnny Carson and Jackie Kennedy Onassis, have seen it. It will eventually become number one at the box office in the last 2 weeks of November, making it, at the time, the highest-grossing foreign language film ever in the U.S. I tried watching this on home video in the 90s and found it mind-numbingly dull. I guess times had changed. Released on March 13th was the new Elvis movie, Charo. Following his TV special in December, this movie seems to serve more notice that Elvis's career path is finally changing. There's no dancing, no silly plots about chasing girls, and no singing on screen. It's a serious Western drama and, as the poster notes, a different kind of role for a different kind of man. The only song is played over the opening credits. Elvis even sports a beard. Unfortunately, it won't be particularly successful, reportedly turning in a very modest profit. Undoubtedly, the biggest movie release of the quarter came on March 13th with Disney's The Love Bug, starring Dean Jones, Michelle Lee, Buddy Hackett, and of course, Herbie the Love Bug, the wild racing Volkswagen with a mind of its own. It'll end up being the highest grossing film of the year, number one at the box office for the first 3 weeks of April, and number one again for the first 3 weeks of July. And on March 26th came Support Your Local Sheriff, a comedy western starring James Garner. The film will initially bomb, but will begin getting good word of mouth from those who have seen it and will be number one for the last 2 weeks of April. Notable on television in the first quarter, on Wednesday, February 5th, following Here Come the Brides on ABC, comes the premiere of Turn On, a mod news series from the people who brought us the massive breakaway hit Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In. Laugh-In producers Ed Friendly and George Slaughter are eager to expand their comedy empire and to push the boundaries of TV comedy. Turn On is similar to Laugh-In with a series of quick blackout sketches. The cuts are even quicker than Laugh-In, to the point a lot of people find it disturbing, and there are no sets, audience, or laugh track. The soundtrack features bleeps and gurgles from one of the new Moog synthesizers. The jokes are almost exclusively about sex. On its premiere, it's almost universally hated and is canceled midway through its single airing. In fact, in Cleveland, the broadcast is abandoned during the first commercial break. The show will gain infamy as one of the biggest flops in television history. 2 nights later, on Friday, February 7th, comes This Is Tom Jones, a much more normal musical variety series starring singing sensation Tom Jones, which will do much better for ABC, running for nearly 2 years until January 1971. The ABC daytime soap opera Dark Shadows continues to be hugely popular with its stories of vampires, witches, and ghosts. After a prolonged build-up on December 16, 1968, we'd gotten our first glimpse of the ghost of Quentin Collins. Apart from an off-screen laugh heard in an episode in February, the character has no dialogue until March 3, 1969. After that, he becomes a major character for the duration of the show's run. Quentin is played by actor David Selby. He quickly becomes nearly as popular as the series' other breakthrough celebrity, Jonathan Frid, who plays the vampire Barnabas Collins. Selby is soon appearing on the cover of 16 magazine along with other teen heartthrobs like Michael Cole of Mod Squad and the big new teen idol of the time, Bobby Sherman. March 1969 begins one of Dark Shadow's flashback arcs, this one to the year 1897, concentrating on Quentin's origin story. It'll last until November and represents the height of the series' popularity. This will be followed by a story arc concerning the Leviathan people, considered the first major misstep by the show's writers. Of course, with Dark Shadow's massive popularity in 1969, there will be plenty of merchandising, including posters, several popular series of bubblegum cards, board games, jigsaw puzzles, a comic book series, Viewmaster reels, models of the characters, a model of Barnabas Vampire Van, which of course was never a part of the show, several series of paperback novels, a joke book and a cookbook, articles in monster magazines, and a top 20 soundtrack album. A recording of Quentin's theme from the series by the Charles Randolph Green Sound will enter the charts in June and will peak at number 13 for the first 2 weeks of August. Also growing in popularity with daytime audiences is the syndicated Galloping Gourmet, a cooking show starring freewheeling, wine-sipping English chef Graham Kerr, whose dishes sometimes come out and sometimes don't. Kerr brings off-the-cuff humor to the proceedings, and though he often speaks about his wife Trina, he has the air of a sophisticated bachelor, sort of a funny James Bond who cooks. The Smothers Brothers Comedy Hour is still pushing the envelope. Their troubles with network censors continue to escalate. The Sunday, March 9th episode features a guest appearance by Joan Baez, who talks about the fact that her husband is in jail for refusing to serve in the military. Rather than air the episode, CBS puts on a rerun. The show finally airs 3 weeks later with Baez saying her husband is in jail, but the reason has been deleted from the broadcast. Nevertheless, the Smothers Brothers remains strong in the ratings, and on March 14th, CBS renews it for the 1969-1970 season. In news as 1969 began, on January 9th, NASA announces its crew selection for the first moon landing, currently scheduled for the summer. Michael Collins will remain with the command module. If all goes as planned, Edwin Buzz Aldrin and Neil Armstrong will become the first humans to walk on the moon. On January 20th, Richard M. Nixon takes the oath of office, becoming the 37th President of the United States. Film star Boris Karloff dies at the age of 81 on February 3rd. Through his long career, he was, of course, best known for his breakthrough role as Frankenstein's monster in 1931. On March 3rd, Apollo 9, the third manned spaceflight of the Apollo program, is launched into Earth orbit. The major aim of the mission is to test the Lunar Module, or LEM, in preparation for the moon landing projected for the summer. It's undocked from the command module, its propulsion systems are tested, and successfully redocked with the command module. The crew returned to Earth on March 13th. On March 12th, the Bachelor Beatle, Paul McCartney, marries divorced American Linda Eastman in a small ceremony in London. On the same day, fellow Beatle George Harrison is arrested at his home for possession of cannabis. John Lennon had been subject to a similar arrest 5 months earlier on October 18, 1968. 8 days later, on March 20th, John Lennon and Yoko Ono marry in Gibraltar and fly to Amsterdam, where they begin a bed-in for peace at the Amsterdam Hilton on March 25th. The press is invited. Naturally, nobody knows what a bed-in for peace is. After the outrageous cover of their Two Virgins album released a few months earlier, a wild scene is expected. When reporters turn up, it's just the couple clad in pajamas, sitting in bed, ready to talk about world peace on and off for a week until March 31st. It's a lot tamer than expected, but not used to a Beatle taking part in a conceptual event, it seems pretty strange to most people. Ringo, meanwhile, is filming a second solo acting role, this time co-starring with Peter Sellers. Much of the Beatle news in the first quarter concerns them as individuals, fueling rumors that the group is broken up. They had spent January working on a new project, even having performed a live set on the roof of their Apple headquarters on Savile Row in London on January 30th. Reportedly, the project had not gone well. On March 28th, Dwight D. Eisenhower dies at the age of 78. He was, of course, the supreme commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force in World War II and two-term president of the United States from 1953 to 1961. We'll leave it there for this week. I hope you enjoyed this start to 1969. Next week, we'll get to Beach Boy events in the first quarter, and we will begin our discussion of the Beach Boys 2020 album. Hope you'll join me for that. Thanks for watching. Please hit like if you don't mind. Subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week. Bye.